those things?
My IT guys set it to like a 2-minute.
What?
It's just
It's a security thing.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to another fun-filled session at GrrCON 2019. Hopefully you're enjoying your Friday. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Milan Patel. He's going to talk about an SOC. I love these acronyms today. It's been great. So, about life in your SOC. So, Milan.
Thanks. Thanks, guys. So, this usually takes about 45 minutes, but I got 25, so I'm going to speak New York fast because that's where I'm from. So a little background on myself, spent a number of years at the FBI as a field agent and then finally the CTO of the cyber division, where I spent a lot of time on incident response and cybercrime, investigations like Anonymous and Silk Road, when I was a street agent in New York and then transitioned out of government a few years ago to help found the company I'm at today, which is BlueVoyant. Going to talk a little bit about, and I'm sure you guys know this from the audience. I left this slide in. I could have taken it out, even though you guys know some of this stuff, but I thought it'd be fun to show you guys some pictures I took along the way in my career on the right-hand side. I often tell the story of the picture in the middle there with the guy with the money on him. He was a part of a criminal organized crime ring out of Eastern Europe, Russian-backed organized crime that had siphoned about 2 million credit cards and debit cards out of a well-known multinational bank. That organized crime gang had a deep website set up that was operating in real time with customer service, the whole 9 yards, and basically signing up Russian J1 students, kids who came from Russia to come here to go to school. They would overstay their visas, not want to go back to Russia for obvious reasons, and they would turn into skimmers. They would get MSR 206s, hotel key cards, and then go hit ATMs. This guy in the middle there hit 200 ATMs in New York City in the span of about 4 weeks and siphoned out like $3 million in $20 bills. He stuffed that money after paying off, sending money via Western Union in walls at his house, and then spackled over it. We had to actually dig through walls to find the money on the bottom right-hand picture. I illustrate this point because, things haven't really changed since those investigations I was a part of. But what we are seeing is sort of that organized crime element become very technically sophisticated. And so when we think about Russian organized crime, we think about other Eastern European organized crime. It was more organization 5 or 6 years ago, trying to get young kids to do credit card fraud, ATM fraud. And what we found is those same criminal gangs are now running full-blown operations to build pretty substantial pieces of code designed to be as a service. And today we're tracking a lot of these guys in the deep and dark web, and we're finding some amazing ways they're maintaining their persistence, evading next-gen AV, like some of the guys on the other side of the expo hall. And we see it every day in our SOC. And it's an interesting place because I think it's really impacting how SOCs are supposed to run. SOCs for many years were designed to be very reactive. They processed alerts, they triaged, they then sent the alert to the customer, or if there was an internal SOC, sent it to the business unit responsible for those group of servers or machines, and then somebody would manually come by, take a look at it, and everybody figure out they don't know really what's wrong, they're scared, and they rebuild the machine. And as you guys know, and as you've seen before, rebuilding machines on end is very tiresome, very uncomfortable, and makes a lot of people unhappy. And so how do you do that more transparently? How do you do it more proactively? And sort of happy to say that the industry is evolving. But really we're still sort of in this place where most organizations, whether you've outsourced your SOC or you've got an internal SOC, depending on the size of the organization, what we find is the same problem. If you guys have grown up in forensics or incident response like I have, there wasn't a day that went by that you weren't copying, pasting in VirusTotal, you weren't doing, basic, rudimentary, pivot tables in Excel spreadsheets, looking for IP addresses and, user agent strings and doing things manually. And so what we found in the space, especially in the mid-market space, is these organizations have realized that, they're going to be attacked. There's going to be a threat to their brand and reputation. And how to actually impact that. What's happened is a sort of spur to go buy a bunch of tools. So they're buying CrowdStrike, Carbon Black, Splunk, and all these great tools. And the tools are great. They work well. We use all of those in our SOC at BlueVoyant. But what we found is there's no material change except for more detections, more false positives. And so how do you deal with that? How do you figure out a creative way to bridge these tools together in a way that you can actually track a threat from it coming in your environment, it doing its nasty thing and then leaving? And can you show that threat that came into the environment was just an incident rather than a breach? And the distinction there is something was stolen, corrupted, or damaged, where you've got to call outside counsel, you've got to call an incident response team, and then you talk about the tail end of an IR engagement where you're doing cleanup forensics. There's law firms involved. There's notifications to customers, accounts, and partners that you've lost their data. And every state across the country has a unique way of identifying what notification is, and with respect to what happens inside of a network. Some states, the mere compromise of a server that had client data on it requires and triggers notification. And so if you've got a database of 1 million customers, you're making a notification to 1 million customers. You can ask Equifax and Target and Home Depot what that's really like. I can tell you that the cost of that far outweighed anybody being on site, fixing any machines and getting things up and running. Had the unfortunate pleasure of being a part of some of those breaches. And I can tell you most of it was around not the fact that they didn't have technology. They all did. They all had the next gen buzzword of every device you could possibly think of. What they had was product fatigue and alert fatigue. They had too many products, too many tools to monitor, and all these tools are different and approach alerting differently based on thresholds that those platforms are designed to trigger on. And what we end up finding is there's more tools and more data than one person can handle, let alone a SOC that's built internally or externally. And so we don't see a drastic change in any of this information in the last few years, which is we're still seeing an enormous amount of time being wasted on alerts that don't matter, and then alerts that matter, not enough time. And I can tell you we see this on a regular basis when we go do IR for companies that have been breached where we don't provide any sort of services for them. We see the same thing. They'll give us a list of all the alerts that were generated out of their Splunk environment in an Excel spreadsheet, and they'll say, we think we may have looked at these, but we're not entirely sure. And so you'll find inevitably in those alerts, you will find the telltale sign of a breach or a compromise or some sort of credential theft. And so we don't see a lot of change in these problems around mean time to detect, mean time to respond. And really that response is more not just response, it's really remediation. In the industry, we sort of confuse these two together. When you think about MDR, just the terminology, Gartner sees it and the industry sees it as a response, which is somebody picking up the phone, making a call saying, I've responded, I've told you something is wrong. And really that's 10% of the problem, right? You got the 10% right. You've notified your customer or your team that there's a problem. But the rest of it is what exactly happened, what took place, and how to actually rectify that problem, not from just the point of the detection of ransomware and your next-gen AV was able to identify the encryption and kill it before it encrypted the entire machine. The challenge really is how do you defeat the persistence mechanisms and the propagation techniques that these new pieces of malware are using? And really a good example of that, this was a live case from one of our customers. We had, in this particular instance, next-gen AV running. We were managing it for them, running their policies, and deployed actually the next-gen AV solution for them. Rather large company got hit with TrickBot and Ryuk, right, at the same time. And what we found was the AV solution kicked in and stopped the execution of code. But what we ended up finding was every machine that payload had touched was trying to execute this code. And so you can imagine the number of alerts being generated out of the SIM environment and out of the next-gen AV solution, where you're seeing hundreds of alerts per hour across thousands of machines over and over again. And what we figured out was it was more than just the ransomware trying to encrypt and the next-gen AV doing its job. Is the tool had left behind a ton of ways to be persistent on the network, writing over SMB, doing discovery, lateral movement, stopping updates to antivirus, making all these things available because the bad guys realize, look, we make it stop, but let's keep the persistence mechanism in place. Given that, hopefully one day our malware does land, and we'll have at least our payload in there, and we can send down new stuff. So this particular one is really, really interesting because not just it was credential scraping, writing over SMB, using sort of living off the land techniques. It went pretty deep into looking at what as I'm sure you guys know what Scribbly do is, but really just a binary sign by Microsoft that allows for deregistration and unregistration of controls within the registry. And what we found was Squibbly-Doo was not only just a part of this problem, we couldn't get it off the machines. So we couldn't use Next-Gen AV to reverse shell into the machines and remove this activity. We had to start writing custom policies to actually impact this. So what we did was we wrote a couple of different policies. Number one was if anything wrote over SMB or tried to make a lateral movement over SMB and it tried to make an external network connection, sever that connection, don't allow that SMB to happen. But if it doesn't actually rise to the level of creating an external connection, go ahead and let that happen. Because if we don't let it happen, then you've got, disruption to the network. And this was during the day, right? So the company's up and running, there's people running around doing their jobs. And if you start sort of, cutting off basic Windows functions, you're going to start impacting the user base. And the last thing the CISO wants to do is have, a lot of employees upset that they can't get their job done. They could care less about the attack themselves, but they want to get their job done. And so what we found was not only that it was doing this and also doing the registry key changes at the same time. And so what we ended up having to do is write these custom policies to go in and basically stop SMB from making internet connections and go in and actually forcefully fix the registry keys to remove the ability for the payload to actually do this. And so, when you think about sort of what a SOC operation is and what an incident response is, this was all done remotely. There was no body, there was no team. I didn't send anybody on site to do this work. This was all done through the console of the Next-Gen AV solution. And this goes back to my point, which is these tools are great. They work really well. But you got to know how to use them. Most of our customers who buy the next-gen tools will come to us and say, hey, we just bought, XYZ company tool. We realized we actually don't know how to use it. It looked cool when we bought it, and it looked like it was doing its job because all these lights go off and all these things pop up, and we're like, it's doing its job. And, you go back and everybody gets a thumbs up. And the reality is that they are good tools. The challenge is their detection mechanisms are somewhat aggressive. And so they detect on a lot that things that shouldn't be detected on that requires whitelisting and custom policy development. But more importantly, it is capturing this data, but it needs to be forced to go do something about it. So this particular instance, the out of the box policy for this next gen AV solution is to go let this binary run, to not stop it. Because if you stop this binary from running, it's going to disrupt the operating system and thereby disrupting work on the network. And so when you buy these solutions, they're great at detecting. They've got great policy enforcement, but you got to know how to use the policy enforcement to go in and do this. And so when we see things like this is, by the way, a customer who had bought this tool, had it for 6 months, and then realized this was too much for them. And they were thinking about removing it and going back to a traditional AV platform. We came in and told them, absolutely not, don't go back to traditional AV, because you're not going to have the ability to investigate and determine the root cause of those issues after the fact. And so when we talk about sort of, really fighting back, what are we really talking about? We're really talking about is shifting to sort of a different philosophy, right? Asking more questions up front of your SOC operation. Is it really bad? How bad is it? What makes it bad? Could this be legitimate? These are all really important questions as we start seeing malware and the various payloads getting into environments designed to live off the land, right? So it's basically good stuff behaving badly, and how do you actually make sense of that? And what we found is, over the last few years of building this capability out, we saw that the questions we're asking are great questions, but they're really hard questions to ask. And to do that at scale is really difficult. And so we added in orchestration into the platform that allowed us to ask all those questions quickly. So I know you can't see the screen in detail, but on the right-hand side is an entire automated playbook designed to look for gang grab. And that's it. It's designed to look for the persistence mechanism, its propagation, and the payload itself. And so what you're seeing is a fork when we determine it's high confidence, and via API from the platform, it's going back into that next-gen AV solution, killing the process, deleting the payload, and then quarantining that machine from the network so it can't go spread itself, just in case deletion didn't work. And this is all being done with those same basic questions that we're asking before, which is, is it really bad? How is it bad? Why is it bad? All these really, really tough questions to ask, especially when you're talking about things that are legitimate in an enterprise that are designed to run, like PowerShell and others, but being used in a malicious way or masquerading behind something else. And so really what we're talking about is the ability to do this at scale, do it efficiently. And we're starting to see SOC operations, whether you've outsourced it or you're building your own SOC, some of the largest banks in the world are finally starting to get to a place where they're automating a lot of these tickets, particularly on the benign and false positive side, which is now cutting down the amount of time it takes for SOC analysts to actually do reviews of more important stuff. Today at our SOC, we roughly automate 50% of tickets. So all the false positives and benign indicators that are created from the network, we're actually running through various playbooks, enriching them with threat intelligence and making determinations are they really bad? Are they not? And that key distinction between, is this an incident or is this a breach? We don't tell our customers we can stop you from incidents, because that's not possible. No tool should be able to do that. No human should be able to do that. But can we give our customers a sense of comfort to know we are looking for that delta between what's an incident, what's a breach? And that is where the rubber meets the road, particularly if you've suffered a breach and you realize what it takes to actually resolve a breach. It's not just forensics, as I said. It's law firms, it's IR teams, it's auditors, it's examiners from federal regulators who come in and ask the questions, what did you actually do here when this breach happened? Show us your incident response plan. And most people's incident response plans are non-existent. They don't have one. And so what we end up finding, if you think about the mercantile exchange that was breached in Chicago, the federal regulator went to them and basically said, show us your IR plan, show us what you did when you figured this out. And the simple question they asked was, when did you find this was bad? When was it really bad? And what's the delta between when you realized it was bad, you did something about it? And that delta was massive, because people are running around trying to figure out what to do. There's IT guys saying, I own this, you own this, I don't want to be stuck with it, it's not my database, I didn't configure it, I don't know who did what, I don't have the logs, that doesn't feed into our Splunk environment. So if you ask me to look at it, I have no idea, because you never sent me those logs. And so we saw a lot of that infighting get generated from not being able to respond appropriately to these problems. And really, the name of the game is trying to find really, really creative ways to reduce the amount of false positives in an environment, so you can then go concentrate on the more significant stuff that potentially could be a breach, where there's a corruption of data, an exfiltration of data of some kind. And you really can't do that if you're buried in alerts that look really important, but they're really not, right? So commodity malware that was stopped by Next Gen AV, is that a problem? Should anybody be reviewing that? Or should you just get it out of the network? Versus something like this that I showed, where it requires some actual additional root cause analysis behind the scenes to make sure it was really out of the network. And what we tell people as a sort of, I guess, funny and crude way, it's you can hire ADT, right, to monitor your house with cameras, and they can come in and tell you where all the cameras should go. But if you're not home and you're looking at your camera through your app and somebody robs your house, there's not much going on. They're going to be robbing your house while you're not home. And so what we like to tell folks is, it's not enough to have ADT. It's not enough to have just cameras. You've got to think about where the right place is to put in blocks and put in humans to go affect some of these things that are very manual in nature. We talk about AI, we talk about machine learning, and those are all great things, and they will impact cybersecurity in the coming years. But really what we're talking about is this ability to use humans to empower technology to do a better job at identifying these issues, which typically is what drowns out a SOC. If you look at any SOC, the number of alerts that come in, and the number of them are handled under the SLA ticker, you would be shocked on what the SLA says and what the actual timer says on the real-time response. And so lastly, I'll just say, in general, what we're talking about is, these great tools that we see in the marketplace today, you have to have them. They do a really good job at detection. They do a better job at behavioral detections than some of the older legacy tools. But what we find is that they're scaled back. The policies that are written are scaled back, which is good and bad, because you don't want to disrupt the network. But the reality is, some humans got to come in and interact with that next gen tool and determine what processes we're going to write, or what policies we're going to write, we're going to enforce on the network, whether it be blacklisting, whitelisting, or some combination of both, depending on what you want to do on the network. And so this particular customer, that's actually part of their policy development. And we actually went in manually and created a lot of different things for them. And we actually learned after that incident response, there were a bunch of other things on the network that if they were hit a different way, would have probably impacted them. So we went in and cleaned some of those things up as well, which was like, batch processes in the middle of the night for their financial applications. We actually saw that those batch processes didn't make any network connections. So we wrote a custom policy to say, if this batch process runs, let it run, but if it makes an external network connection, don't let it run. Things of that nature, we did for this customer. And we think we've got this network pretty locked down, but again, it's never perfect. These policies need to be reviewed from time to time, and you need experts to do it. So I can give 5 minutes back. I'm actually all done. Did New York fast. How's that? All right. Thank you, guys.